Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage NACD President-elect Lee McDaniel.
Good morning, conservationists. Welcome to today's morning session. I hope you all enjoyed yesterday's session as much as I did. We have a very special treat today because this morning session is going to be live streamed by Brian Ulmer from Colorado, the Barn Media organization. And Brian, we're glad to have you on board and doing that for us, so thank you very much. We had an excellent auction last night, had a lot of fun, raised a lot of money. The total for the night came to $75,690. So thank you for those individuals, state associations, corporate sponsors, all of those who donated those auction items to us, and also thank you to those bidders who got those prices up to where we needed them. We had an excellent turnout. Hope everybody had a lot of fun there as well. We have a special program lined up for you today. Our speakers are going to take us through the progression of conservation in America. First, we'll have former NRCS Chief Dave White start us off with a history lesson, looking at the roots of conservation districts. Then we'll hear from a panel of federal agency speakers about conservation today. And finally, we'll hear from Chief Weller with a perspective of what's ahead for conservation and the role of districts in the future. With that, I'd like to call up Dave White to kick off the program. As many of you know, Dave has over 35 years of professional leadership experience in natural resource conservation with NRCS and in the private sector. After working in numerous locations throughout the United States, Dave was chief of the NRCS from January 2009 to December 2012. And I know Dave doesn't want me to read it all, but I'm going to do it anyhow. Dave has also spent significant time on Capitol Hill. In 2007, he was detailed to Iowa Senator Tom Harkin's office in Washington, D.C., where he helped craft the conservation title of the 2008 Farm Bill. He also served on a detail to Indiana Senator Richard Lugar and helped develop the conservation title of the 2002 Farm Bill. Today, as a consultant and president of a small startup company, Dave is bringing his expertise to sustainability efforts, establishing water quality trading, and promoting effective policies that advance conservation on private lands. Please help me welcome Dave White.
Thanks, Dave. Greetings, everyone. As always, it's an honor to be with you. Conservation districts, it was said yesterday about you being the common sense group. I think you are the only group with 1 foot in agriculture, 1 foot in conservation, and blended with common sense. So we really need you. Now, Krista said yesterday to look back but don't stare. So we're going to look back a little bit, but we're not going to stare. And I want to start this in the year of our Lord, 1905. There's a young person who just graduated from the University of North Carolina. His first job out of school, he's going to be a soil surveyor for the Bureau of Soils at USDA. His name is Hugh Hammond Bennett, just out of school. Bennett's his first assignment is in Louisa County, Virginia, and he's doing the soil survey there. And one day, Bennett is looking at the landscape, and he knows the soil type is the same in this landscape. But on one side of it, it's a crop field, and the other side is forest land. And he looks at the soil here, and it's dry, it's brittle, there's no organic matter. And he looks over here under the duff, and the soil smells rich, and it's moist, and it's full of life. And Bennett becomes one of the first people to get the relationship. He has an epiphany. How we treat the soil will determine our long-term productivity, our long-term sustainability. So he goes back to his bosses, the man in Washington, D.C., and he tells them all about this. He's all excited. They say, thanks, college kid. Appreciate the input. We'll take it under advisement. They completely ignore him. In fact, they ignore him to the extent in 1908, 3 years later, USDA publishes a brochure saying that soil is the only immutable, indestructible resource we have. Bennett will later say he did not know how it was possible to convey so much costly misinformation in so few words. But Bennett doesn't give up. He still keeps talking. He still keeps preaching what he knows to be the truth. And they try to get rid of him. They sent him to Alaska. They sent him to South America a couple times. They sent him to one country where there was a civil war going on. Now, that's kind of a message. But he doesn't give up. They actually create a little cabal, him and some university researchers that kind of are on the same page, and they're corresponding with letters reinforcing each other. But this lasts till 1930. Can you imagine from 1905 to 1930 being shut out? The Bible talks about the patience of Job. I submit to you the patience of Hugh Hammond Bennett and determined leadership and determined commitment. 1930, things start to turn around for him. Representative James Buchanan, he's a Democratic chair of the Appropriations Committee. Bennett convinces him that he needs money. He gets appropriated $160,000 in 1930 to establish soil erosion experiment farms. He gets 8 of them up and going. But then, 1933, everything that Bennett foresaw in 1905 comes true with a vengeance. The Dust Bowl starts. And the Dust Bowl begins ravaging the Great Plains. And that's not all. Down south, King Cotton is pretty much destroying the landscape there. 1933, President Roosevelt signs a piece of paper, creates the Soil Erosion Service. Bennett's named the first chief. 1935, Congress passes our Domestic Soil Conservation Act and creates the Soil Conservation Service. Bennett's named the first chief. So things are really starting to go. He's hiring people. They have like 25,000 Civilian Conservation Corps people working with them. And they go to work on the landscape. And then in 1937, 2 years later, Bennett's not happy. He's not happy. It's not working. The progress is much too slow because there's a missing ingredient in this recipe. And what was that missing ingredient? Conservation districts. Roosevelt sends out a model law to the governors of the states, and they each start enacting their own legislation. You are all legislatively codified in state law. Districts start to spring up, but it wasn't easy. There was a lot of opposition. West Virginia did a little video that we show in the Walton advocacy training, and there's headlines from the newspapers of that time. People saying districts are iniquitous. I didn't know what that was. I looked it up. It ain't good. There were fistfights that were breaking out on whether you have a district or not. But they persevered. Districts became the law of the land. We began to turn the tide out of the depths of the Great Depression, out of the depths of the worst environmental disaster. Local farmer-led groups turned the tide. Then in 1946, a bunch of you or your predecessors got together. We need a national organization. NACD was created. 1954, we see the Small Watershed Program. Later bills like we got the RC&D and we got other programs. In 1985, Reagan creates conservation compliance, and conservation becomes a little more important in the farm situation. In 2002 was I guess you could say, a banner year for us because of all the money that was put into conservation in the 2002 Farm Bill. Then we go to the 2014 Farm Bill. And for the first time ever, it's projected that more money will be spent on conservation than in the commodity titles. So like that old Virginia Slims commercial, you've come a long way, baby. But before the 2014 bill was passed, there was a group of foundations. They did a nationwide survey to find out what Americans thought of farmers. There is such a reservoir of support for farmers. 88% believe that farmers are good stewards and that conservation is a top priority. Now, their number one concern is food safety. They want the food they give their kids to be safe. Number two is water quality. And those are going to be some big issues for us. You've heard it said before, you know the numbers, 9 billion people by 2050. We're going to have a 70 to 100% increase in food production. Norman Borlaug said a couple years ago, before he passed away, that in the next 40 years, we are going to have to produce as much food as we did in the previous 10,000 years combined. And we're going to have to produce that food in the face of an extremely erratic climate. It's not going to be easy. And how are we going to do that without trashing our natural resources? How are we going to do that and make sure that our kids have clean air and clean water and plentiful wildlife and a healthy environment? And that's where conservation districts are going to be so key. And the headlines are frightening around the world. Jerusalem Post in December, the Israeli farmers have told the government they don't think they can no longer produce food if water prices stay as high as they are. NASA came out with a report on groundwater, freshwater depletion. They say it's fueling now regional conflicts. That's a nice way of saying it's fueling local wars. People are dying over this issue. California is in the worst drought in 1,200 years. Yesterday, there was an article that said for the first time that we have records, the city of San Francisco had 0 precipitation during the month of January. So what happened in Toledo this past summer? Right now we have a lawsuit in Des Moines. Things are getting pretty serious. There was a GAP report last year, and what they tried to do was look at what the food needs would be in a region and what that region's productive capability was. And that was the GAP. East Asia, and they looked at 2030 food needs. East Asia is only projected to be able to produce 67% of the food they need. 67%. Sub-Saharan Africa, only 15%. And when you look at all this stuff, I feel like I'm Ebenezer Scrooge with the ghost of Christmas future. And you wonder, are these the shapes of things to come that must be? Or can we do something now and change it so things are better in the future? And I pray to God that we can change it. And I pray that conservation districts lead that charge. So what do we do? And I'm telling you, there's part of our history is opposition. And we have opposition right now. Districts, there's people in this room who know this firsthand. In one of our states, 3 people of a certain political persuasion were elected to the local conservation board. They voted to dissolve it. It no longer exists. A couple years ago, when things were really tough in the budget, there was one state that actually debated whether or not to just get rid of districts. They don't need them anymore. Another state, Western state, the association almost dissolved. And some of the people who saved it are right here. It was through the efforts of a handful of district commissioners who really cared that it's still there and it's on the road back. There's a national organization right now that put out a paper. They say that the way to solve our conservation environmental problems is that it should be done by locally led groups led by farmers. I thought we already had that. But they don't think so. So we got to wake up, because this is serious stuff. This is serious stuff for the nation. It's serious stuff for the world. And a lot of it lies in your hands. You know, Krista said yesterday that she's never seen things that look better or, the greater opportunity for districts than there is right now if we step up. And we got to step up. There's a couple things that I think we need to step up on. First, we got too much over-reliance on staff. Commissioners and supervisors got to take a bigger role. And second, we've got to start taking our legislative responsibility seriously. You may be unpaid, but you are not a volunteer. You have statutory responsibilities in every state, and you ought to be carrying them out. I was in your shoes. I got elected to a school board in my local community quite a while ago. And I wasn't paid either, but I didn't think of myself as volunteer. I thought of myself as the person who was going to represent the Battlefield District in Spotsylvania County on that school board, and I was going to speak for those parents and those kids. And I had the governor, the senator, the representative, my state senator, my state delegate, and the county supervisor on speed dial. And I know how to use a phone, and I always let them know what we needed. Sometimes successfully, sometimes not so. We got to get back to that. I think a lot about districts, and you are the only entity with 1 foot in ag and 1 foot in conservation. Do you know how rare it is to have somebody understand agriculture in Washington, D.C.? It's hard to find somebody who can spell agriculture, let alone understand it, let alone know what it means to face adverse weather and pests and all kinds of problems and scheduling problems and still make a living out of the land. And yet the other foot cares about the future, cares about leaving those resource bases to the kids and the little Americans who we will never see, who will never know our names, but what we hand them. You're so critical to that whole thing. I learned a lesson about your power. This is in 2002 when I was attached to Senator Lugar. And this is before Daschle gets sent the anthrax that shuts down the Hart Building. This is before 9/11. And me and 2 other staffers were briefing Senator Lugar on how the conservation title was coming. And he had a little round table in his office, and I was all fired up. I had read all these position papers from all these groups, and I made this matrix. And across the top of the matrix was the group, like Farm Bureau and Corn Growers and Wheat and Environmental Defense Fund and Ducks Unlimited. And then down this side, I had, Wetland Reserve, EQIP, the programs, and I put what they wanted in each box. And I'm going over this thing with Senator Lugar. I had studied and read and all this kind of stuff. And I said, and here's what National Farm Bureau wants and EQIP, and here's what National Farm Bureau wants and WRP. And he stops me. He said, Dave, he says, that's very nice. What does the Indiana Farm Bureau want? Oh, I'll get back to you. But I learned a lesson. What national things are fine, but what these elected representatives want to know is what you want, what the people who are going to vote for them or vote against them want. And you can tell them exactly that better than anybody in the world. Let me close up here, and let's talk about what one supervisor can do. I started my career in Missouri, and there's some Missourians here, and they know exactly who I'm going to be talking about. Years 1980, 1981, one supervisor, her name was Betty Bromelsek. She's from St. Charles County. She came up with this crazy idea. We should have a state sales tax to help fund conservation. And she pushed it. And it took a couple years to develop it and flesh it out. And there was a lot of compromises. But it wasn't just a sales tax. She went for a constitutional amendment to put it in the Missouri Constitution. And what it would be was 1/10 of 1% of the sales tax would be split. Half would go to the state parks, half would go to the conservation districts. That was the compromise. They wanted to get as many votes as they can. Betty Bromelsek, one supervisor in one county, led that effort. Now, a lot of people did a lot of stuff. Staff did a lot of work. But when the chips were down, she was the one who kept her chin up. She was the one who never lost faith. She was the one who led that effort. And when the vote was taken, the constitutional amendment passed by 50.1%. Part of the thing was it has to be voted on every 5 years, I think. The last time it went before the voters, it passed by 76%. Betty Bromelsek is gone. She's not with us. But her legacy lives on. Hundreds of millions of dollars are on the landscape because of what she did. She's part of the rich fabric and history of this organization. And every single one of us has that power. And as we look at what lies ahead, America needs you. The world needs you. The challenges we face today are bigger than the ones they faced in the 30s. They're more complex. The stakes are higher. We cannot fail. Conservation districts, we need you. God bless you. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. I think there were some real words of wisdom there. I hope you all take some of those words to heart when you go home. Up next, I'd like to hand over the podium to Barry Mahler, past president of the Association of Texas Soil and Water Conservation Districts, to kick off our panel discussion focusing on conservation today. Our panelists this morning are Carl De La Rosa, U.S. Forest Service, Ellen Jelinski from the EPA, Kristen Thomasgard from the Department of Defense, and Cynthia Moses Ned from Bureau of Land Management. Please help me welcome Barry and all of our panelists to the stage.
Thank you. Well, thank you, and good morning, everyone. It's so good to be here. And for all you young folks out there, when you get on up to be about my age or older, you begin to realize that most days it's just good to be anywhere. I'm telling you, it really makes a difference. And I was thinking a little bit about Dave's comments there, and he mentioned being on the school board. And I'll bet you there's a lot of people in this room that can identify with that. But I've been told, and I've never done it, never been on the school board, but I know a lot of people that have. They say some of the most feared words in the English language is when someone walks up to you in the grocery store and says, "Are you still on the school board?" You know you're not going to be congratulated about something. So that kind of rings true. So glad to be here this morning. It's outstanding to see all of the people that are so involved in the most important work that I know of, and that is conserving our natural resources. You've heard the statistics. You know what the challenges are that's ahead of us. And to do the things that we need to do on a regular basis, we certainly have to have the cooperation and the help of many, many people. When Tamara Daniel called me and said, could you moderate a panel discussion at the national meeting, I says, wow, what an honor. And it is a tremendous honor to be in front of this esteemed group, because there is so much history here, and not just history, but so much future. And she didn't tell me that I was going to be the ones that was going to stand between you and the federal folks. So I hopefully this will work out, but it's going to work out very well. You know, a lot of times we are really proud of our independence as landowners, as producers, certainly as conservationists. And it does get a little unraveling sometimes, because we think, well, we've got the government on the local, the state, and even the federal level, and good grief, sometimes it seems like they're more in the way than helpful. And I think a lot of times the problems that we have is that we don't have the kind of communication that we need to make sure that every cog in the drivetrain on conservation is engaged and moving forward. And certainly the federal folks bring a lot to the table, and we've got a lot of different agencies that we interact with. And I think it's great that we can get together at this meeting, meet those people face to face, let them talk about who they are, what they do, and how they're involved in this overall work of conservation. One thing that I've learned in my life, that having that conversation, developing a relationship is extremely important to move things forward, and that's what we're going to try to do with this panel this morning. I'm going to introduce the panel members and ask them to come up on stage and then give them a chance to make some comments this morning. We want to save some time for some questions and answers. They are going to be at the speaker's table as soon as this session is over. So if you've got an issue that you would like to talk to any one of them about that deals with their agency or something that they say in their presentation, maybe something that relates to your local district or what's going on in your local area, they will certainly be available to do it, but we will entertain a few questions from the floor this morning if you would like to ask them. So let's get started. And if you would, as I introduce you, if you'll come on up and take a seat, and then we'll bring them up one at a time and make their comments. I'm very proud to get to introduce friends in conservation. And the title of the panel discussion today is Conservation Today. We're going to start with panelist number one, Carl R. Dalla Rosa, the Forest Stewardship Program Manager from the U.S. Forest Service in Washington, D.C. Carl, come on up, and we'll get going here this morning. And let's welcome him. Carl. Panelist number two is Cynthia Moses-Ned, who is liaison to State and Local Government, Bureau of Land Management in Washington, D.C. Good morning, Cynthia. We appreciate you being with us. Let's come up and join us. Panelist number three is Kristen Thomasgard, Program Director of Readiness Environmental Protection Integration Program, the U.S. Department of Defense out of Alexandria, Virginia. Good morning, Kristen. And we'll move on to panelist number four, Ellen Galinsky, Dr. Ellen Galinsky, Senior Policy Advisor, Office of Water, U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, Washington, D.C. Oh, that's the EPA. We've heard about them. We've heard about them. But this is our panel this morning. I think we'll start out, Carl, if you would begin, and we'll have you make your comments. We'll go right down the line, and then as the discussion develops, if you have questions, we will certainly open the microphones at the floor, and we'll enter into discussion. Carl, welcome.
Well, good morning, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. I appreciate the opportunity to speak for a few minutes about what the Forest Service is up to. I've been coming to these meetings for a few years now, and I always come away with some good ideas for how we can improve our programs. You guys are the folks that are extending our reach and working on the ground, and really appreciate what you do to help us with our programs. I work in the state and private forestry side of the Forest Service. So our programs are focused on helping private forest landowners, partnering with state agencies, communities, with really the management of the state and private side of the forest landscape. We're working more and more, I'm happy to say, in the Forest Service, connecting management on state and private land with management on federal land. I think in the past we've tended to kind of look at those two sides of the landscape separately. And I think we're finally moving in a direction where we're taking a more holistic approach to managing the landscape, managing the landscape at a landscape scale, working directly with our partners like NRCS through our government programs so that we're able to address some of the pressing resource management challenges and issues that we're facing. We really appreciate our partnership with NACD, particularly the work of the Forestry RPG. The communication tools that you have that help us get the word out to your membership of what the important issues are and how conservation districts can play a role in helping us to address those issues. If you look at the forest cover in the United States, it's remained pretty steady over the last 100 years. We talk a lot about our primary objectives in our programs, particularly forestry, as being no net loss and retaining forest cover, keeping forests as forests. Well, if you look at forest cover, it's remained relatively steady. So just retaining forest cover and keeping forests as forests is really not enough. I think you know that a lot of our forests are in really bad shape. We've got these extensive insect, pest, and disease infestations. We have catastrophic wildfires that really consume most of the Forest Service's budget. These fires are deadly and dangerous, and they destroy communities. So what we need to do is manage our forests for health and resiliency. We need to take a more landscape-based approach and work across the landscape to do this. Our framework for doing this, our roadmap, if you will, is given to us in the form of state forest action plans. With the 2008 Farm Bill, all states were required to develop statewide strategies for addressing their most pressing and priority resource management concerns. And these statewide strategies encompass all forest land, so both public and private. The success of these state forest action plans depends upon partnerships. Obviously, NACD plays a key role in helping states implement these state forest action plans. And if you're not familiar with the state forest action plan in your state, I encourage you to become familiar with it, to try to identify your role in implementing the state forest action plan. States are coming up on the next revision of these. I think there'll be more opportunity for conservation districts to participate in the development of these state forest action plans next time around, because I think they'll have more time to complete them. So I really encourage you to be at the table when your states are developing their state forest action plans. These are, again, they're a roadmap for how we're delivering and focusing all of our state and private forestry programs. So partnerships are key for forest action plan implementation. The other key to the success of these is focusing and integrating programs. You know, previously we spent a lot of time kind of working separately with respect to our programs, and the state forest action plans provide us with a way to integrate our programs: forest stewardship, urban and community forestry, forest health protection, forest legacy, cooperative fire, state fire assistance, nurseries assistance. Integrate all these programs and focus on the priorities and where on the landscape it makes the most sense to focus those programs so that we can have an impact. The other key to the success of the state forest action plans is for us to use all the tools and authorities that we have available to us, and to take, again, a more landscape-based approach. We've got some new things going on. We've got I think really worth mentioning is a partnership we have with NRCS. It's called the Chiefs Joint Landscape Restoration Partnership. This is a really, I think, promising model because it's I think, the first time our two agencies have come together to figure out how we're going to work together to manage the landscape where public and private lands meet and to better coordinate our programs. There are 13 of these projects currently ongoing nationwide, and there's a process underway for selecting some more projects for that effort. The other thing that we're pursuing is an approach called landscape stewardship through our Forest Stewardship Program. Forest Stewardship Program provides technical and planning assistance to the many private forest family landowners in the country that really own most of the forest land in the country. Whereas previously we worked with landowners kind of one-on-one, fairly scattered across states. This approach, we're taking a more landscape-level planning approach to actually working with groups or aggregations of landowners within key priority landscapes and developing landscape-scale stewardship plans that include multiple ownerships, not necessarily developing a plan for each one of those landowners, but figuring out what best suits those landowners' needs. Some of them need landscape forest stewardship plans. Some just need some sort of technical assistance or information. So just working with landowners where they're at across the landscape. We've got some new tools with the most recent Farm Bill, and I think there could be clearly a role for conservation districts in helping to implement some of these new tools and authorities. One of those is the Good Neighbor Authority, which provides a vehicle for states to enter into cooperative agreements with the Forest Service to extend management from state and private land onto federal land. Previously, this authority was only available in 2 states, Colorado, and Utah, and that was extended to all 50 states with the most recent Farm Bill. Stewardship Contracting Authority, I think most of you are familiar with that. Again, it's a tool with which the Forest Service can really better manage its own lands. That authority was made permanent with the most recent Farm Bill, so we don't have to worry about that authority going away anymore. That's really key tool for us. And then we also have a new program area within state and private called Landscape Scale Restoration. This provides funding. What's really nice about this is it's funding, it's awarded competitively to projects, again, that are addressing priorities that have been identified in the state forest action plans, but the funding can be used cross-program. So when we identify a project that we want to fund, all the programs can be used, all the authorities we have can be used to use that funding to implement these projects on the ground. Each region has its own process for selecting and ranking those projects, but again, if you're not familiar with those projects or how you can submit proposals through the state forester to address some of your needs and to partner more with the states and others, I encourage you to do that. And you're happy to, anybody that wants more information on any of this stuff, I'll be around after the session, and also I invite you to contact me directly at Forest Service headquarters. Thanks very much.
Good morning, and I'm really excited to be here today to have this opportunity to talk to you about what's going on within the BLM and the opportunities that we have to address the many challenges that we face in connection with conservation districts. Our partnership with NACD, of course, is our greatest strength, and by leveraging our resources and by being able to maximize on the work that we do together, that is what's going to allow us to be fruitful and to be victorious over those challenges that try to eat our lunch every day. I was quite heartened to see the conversation about wild horses and burros, which seems to be what our secretary has described as an intractable issue that we now face. But with groups like the subgroup that I had the opportunity to visit with on yesterday, ready to sit down and come up with some of the most inventive ideas to provide to us so that we can together begin to manage horses on the range, be able to rein in populations, be able to urge Congress to do what they need to do in order to help us with this problem. That's going to be our greatest strength. About a year and a half ago, we renewed our MOU with NACD, and we were happy to do that. We've had that MOU in place formally since 2000. And informally, even before that, we were able to work together on numerous projects with the BLM and NACD and our conservation district partners across the West in particular. Accordingly, we've been able to address public lands issues from forestry to range management to invasive species. Remember, we put together a weed awareness toolkit. And if you haven't had an opportunity to pick up some of the handouts that are on the table in the exhibit hall and out near the registration table, they are there. Lots of posters that you can place in your various offices or dole out to your county weed boards to allow for awareness of how invasive species, how these weeds impact our lands and how we can address them with an awareness of cleaning off your bikes after you go out four-wheeling, or all the various measures that we can take in order to address this issue. Conservation and at the local level, it's tough work. It's where you roll up your sleeves and get out on the ground and get these things done. The sacrifices you make are important to us. And how important is it? Our budget, which rolled out on yesterday, included for the Bureau of Land Management $68.3 million proposed for sage-grouse habitat restoration, which is one of the most important issues we are facing at this time. Our sage-grouse conservation efforts will be funded by the $68.3 million, which will allow us to not only embark on improving and ramping up our planning process in order to make sure that we conserve sagebrush habitat, but also it is to fund those partner operations that we're able to have with you and our other state and local and other federal partners. So for the BLM, Forest Service has a singular mission, but our mission, which was put forth by the Federal Land Policy Management Act, affectionately known as FLPMA, allows for multiple use. And so we are not only charged with conservation, but we also are charged with making sure that we allow for recreation, allow for grazing, allow for development of those natural resources on the public lands. All of that provides for a real challenge. But we do that because we have partners like you. We're able to do it effectively, and we are able to do it while still generating more revenue for the United States taxpayer than we spend every year. For fiscal year 2013, BLM's public lands contributed more than $107 billion to the U.S. economy. That's 107 with a B, and supported more than 440,000 jobs. In FY 2014, BLM generated $5.2 billion in receipts from the public lands. And within that, going forward, our director, Neil Cornsey, has identified 6 priorities for the BLM. And as I looked over the priorities of the Southwest Region Board, which I sat in on yesterday, most of those priorities overlap with what we see as our priorities within the BLM. Federal land management, wildfire funding and fuels reduction, forest health, wild horse and burrow management, and invasive species. We are so happy to see those priorities that we believe are important for us to get the work done on the public lands as your priorities, particularly within that southwestern region. I'd like to talk about a couple of key issues, and I look forward to some of the questions that you might have as we continue on with this panel. As I mentioned, sage-grouse and restoring sage-grouse habitat through our partnerships and collaboration, it's going to be important. Because in order to ensure the long-term viability of the sage-grouse, in order for us to be able to continue to allow for production on the public lands, to allow for grazing, in order to allow for that multiple use mandate to continue and not screech to a halt, we have to avoid listing the bird. And so we have engaged in partnerships with districts across the West, of course, along with our state and local partners and other federal partners. We've been able to embark on a journey in uncharted territory by which we are looking forward to making sure that the sage-grouse, the greater sage-grouse, is not added to the endangered species list. And as I mentioned before, that $68.3 million that was included in the budget is going to be key to that. By working with you and our other partners, we will be able to take meaningful steps together so that we can restore the rangelands, minimize the threat of wildfire, control invasives, and improve the riparian areas so that sagebrush habitat is protected and continues. To that end, a large part of that is driven by our BLM planning process. Many of you have sat with us at the table as cooperating agencies as we move forward with our plans. NEPA provides that we invite local, state, and other federal partners, along with our tribal partners, to the table as we are developing our land use plans. And those land use plans guide our management activities on the public lands. We are looking now at expanding those. Much like the Forest Service, we will look on a landscape level approach, recognizing, as we have in the past, but continuing to ramp up our opportunity to address these issues on a landscape level. And so we have embarked on an initiative called Planning 2.0. And that Planning 2.0 will allow us to take a look at the landscape level approach to planning, and also will allow for more robust engagement of our partners, making sure that we are coordinating with you and taking the district resource management plans and taking our proposed land use plans and resource management plans, making that overlay so that we can ensure that it represents the plan that we have is strong, that it's defensible, and it represents and addresses those issues across landscapes. So we look forward to that. We had an opportunity in November to put together a webinar, and many district officials were able to participate. We had this collaboratively through NACD and NACO, and we were able to have many county officials and many district officials on this webinar to provide input to that Planning 2.0 proposal that we have. If you didn't get an opportunity to engage in that way, please feel free to contact me. I will provide my information, or of course Ted Ramsey, who I work closely with at NACD, can provide it to you if we haven't had an opportunity to meet. And you can provide your input on what you would like to see as a part of our Planning 2.0 effort. Another initiative that we're embarking on is our National Seed Strategy. This is a strategy that's being developed through our Plant Conservation Alliance, which includes 12 of the federal agencies who are working together. And with these 12 agencies, it is interesting to me that while our natural partners, the Forest Service, NRCS, Fish and Wildlife Service are at the table, but we've also engaged Federal Highways Administration, which is interesting because allowing for having the right seed in the right place means that we have to engage our non-traditional partners to make sure that we are able to have seed available as needed and also allow for effective restoration of the landscape. Will be an opportunity for districts to provide your input on our seed strategy, which is right now being developed, and we look forward to having your input to the seed strategy, which will be key to making sure that we have viable seed product across the nation in the future. One of our most difficult challenges, of course, I've mentioned it before, is invasive species. And without you, our partners, we would not be able to accomplish the much needed work on the ground to address the issue of abundant weeds on our lands. I mentioned wild horses and burros to you before, and I think that those issues that face us right now are the issues we will need you to partner with us on in the future. We look forward to not just continuing to carry forth with the partnership, but building the partnership in the years to come. Thank you very much, and I look forward to your questions.
Good morning, everyone. And I also am very honored to be here today. And I want to start by asking everyone a question. How many people in this room are curious as to what DOD is doing, talking on a panel about conservation today? Go ahead. It's okay. You can put your hands up. All right. So we may not be considered the most common partner at the table, but I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what the REPI program is, the Readiness and Environmental Protection Integration Program, and then just a little bit about why local partnership and conservation, particularly working with working landscapes, is so important to the Department of Defense. And I'll share a little bit about some of the things that we are working on right now that I really think are critical to not only sustaining the ability for the Department of Defense to continue to operate and provide training and operations for the men and women in uniform, but why that's so important and so related to the work that you guys do on the ground. And I think Dave White actually made a comment that really hit home for me on this point. He talked about food security and water quality and water availability. Those are two things that are as important to the national security of the United States as a trained and ready military force. So really, the Department of Defense and the conservation districts are true and very valuable partners here. Just to little bit about what the REPI program does, because it's a fairly unique program inside the Department of Defense. REPI is really the Department of Defense's key tool for promoting innovative conservation solutions and working with private landowners, working with groups like yours, the conservation districts, working with federal partners, state partners, local land trusts, in order to ensure that we're protecting not only the ability of our installations to test, train, and operate, but also the availability of the working lands that sustain the communities around those installations and provide the fuel and food for the troops and families that live there and that support and sustain this country. So really, we're working on those innovative solutions because it helps us meet our mission, but at the same time, it's helping so many other folks accomplish their goals and objectives. So I'm going to talk briefly on 3 points, and I will keep my comments relatively short this morning, and I would be happy to talk with folks and answer questions later. One, talk a little bit more about why this matters to DoD so much. 2, some ways that we're really working toward these common goals on the ground. And then 3, a way that we're getting a little bit creative with limited resources, which is something I think everyone in this room can identify with. So first, why are conservation and partnerships so important at the local level to DoD? First and foremost, our installations are in your communities, in your counties, in your states. They are part of what you guys see and do every day. As residential development expands, as urban sprawl moves towards these installations, some of the same challenges that military installations face are the same challenges that folks on the ground that are working on farms, working on ranches, foresting every day face. Those places used to be away from you. They used to be away from DoD, and now they're getting closer. And so as neighbors move closer, you have to learn how to deal with those challenges. And for DoD, sometimes that means noise complaints. We make a bunch of noise, we blow things up, we shoot guns. Neighbors don't really like that. You guys might be able to identify with that. Whether you're the one shooting the guns, making the noise, making the dust, or whether you're listening to it. We have to cope with that. We also have safety issues, so we need to make sure that our neighbors are safe. So we work hard to ensure that we can do that, and we work within those challenges to the greatest extent possible. But sometimes there becomes a point when there are certain things we can't accomplish. For example, being able to train at night when there are cities and development close to your installations, you don't have a dark environment to operate in. That becomes a challenge. It doesn't allow for some of our soldiers to do some of the training tasks that are important. And that's where the important link between the military and conservation comes into play. Really, what is causing some challenges for the Department of Defense to be able to operate are the same things that are fragmenting important habitat, fragmenting important working landscapes, and making it harder for us to achieve important conservation goals across the country. And this is why we really need to work together at the local level to address these issues, because we don't solve those problems in DC, we don't solve those problems at the headquarters level in any of our organizations. We solve those problems at the ground, working with the people who are the landowners, who are working that land, and who live in those communities. So I want to touch a little bit on some of the ways that we can work together to accomplish those goals. So the REPI program facilitates cost-sharing partnerships between the military services, the Army, the Air Force, the Navy, and the Marine Corps, and then private conservation organizations, land trusts, state governments, local governments, conservation districts. To date, we've partnered with over 235 local and national organizations, cities, counties, state agencies, and private organizations. And we've protected about 360,000 acres of land in 28 states at 79 different installations. So the program is really a nationwide program. But we've also recognized that while everyone's talking about trying to do more with less, we really need to be doing more with more, and that's more partners. So it's not as important to us to have a handful of big partners as it is important to us to have a lot of small partners on the ground, because that's where the work gets done. One effort that we're really engaged in right now, called the Sentinel Landscapes Partnership, actually resulted from a NACD annual meeting several years ago. There were some sidebar conversations that took place with some folks from Washington State, and folks from my office prior to my arrival there. And they were really talking about some opportunities around Joint Base Lewis-McChord, which is in the South Puget Sound area of Washington State. This is one of the last remaining Puget lowland prairies in the state, and a lot of that last remaining prairie land actually exists on Joint Base Lewis-McChord. Well, the conversation that took place was that, one, there are a number of endangered species, or at the time, candidate species in that area, that really were very compatible with the working agricultural lands around that area. They were also present, those same species, on the installation. It just so happened that the area that those species really liked to inhabit was the same area that the Army really liked to train Stryker brigades. Stryker brigades are big wheeled vehicles that tear stuff up and make a big mess. Well, that wasn't necessarily compatible, but what we were able to do was work with the Fish and Wildlife Service, work with the Natural Resources Conservation Service, work with the community and the counties and the private landowners to identify a way that the Department of Defense could contribute to the protection of those working farmlands, allow those farmlands to continue farming, allow those private landowners to continue doing what they were doing so well, and relieve some of the restrictions on the military installation. And the Fish and Wildlife Service was able to identify the benefit that DoD was helping to provide, give some assurances to those private landowners, and to establish a baseline for those species that would allow the Department of Defense to meet their mission while protecting that species and keeping those working lands working. That was a true success in our eyes, and it launched what we call the Sentinel Landscapes Partnership now with the pilot project at Joint Base Lewis-McChord. So we're planning on moving forward with that partnership, and we will be making additional announcements about other projects and other opportunities in the coming weeks and months. But I think it's important to note that that happened here as a result of the types of folks who came together and really saw that opportunity. So that's really a unique way for us to move forward with this partnership. The last thing that I want to mention is how are we getting creative with limited resources? And I want to make a point that this was the result of folks coming and telling us that there was a better way to do things. That's what's so valuable about us participating in a forum like this. Well, there's a whole lot of people in D.C. who think they know the answers to every question there is. I guarantee that there's a majority of this audience that thinks that that is not the case, and I would agree with you. However, we need to know what those things are that don't work or that could work better, because our job is to enable the ability for this conservation to occur on the ground. And if we are doing something at a policy level, at a procedural level, and it's not working, we can't fix it if we don't know it's not working. So this is a great opportunity for us to exchange that, and I hope you take advantage of that opportunity. Ask us questions, share your ideas. That's what's valuable to us here. But one of the things that came out of that dialogue was an amendment over the past year that allows DoD funds to be a match to conservation program funds in both the Department of Interior and the Department of Agriculture. I'll give you a very quick example of what that means. This is an example from California at Vandenberg Air Force Base. They requested $750,000 from my office to place a conservation easement valued at $1.5 million on a working farm near the installation. At the same time, the partner on that project, the Trust for Public Land, submitted an application to NRCS for $750,000 of agricultural easement program funds. They matched up that $750,000 of NRCS funding with $750,000 of DoD funding and are able to protect that working farm, and that farm is adjacent to the boundary of Vandenberg Air Force Base, where the Air Force does a lot of rocket launches and a lot of test activities that are very critical to the nation's defense. It's just one small example, and we're really hoping to continue that. So, 3 quick points. 1, everything happens at the local level. We appreciate that, we know that, and we need your input in order to continue to be successful there. What we have been able to protect in the REPI program is the result of the effort on the ground. Second of all, you guys know what's not working and you know what's working. Please tell us. Please use this opportunity to use our funds with matches for other funds that you have out there, and let us know what else we can do. And then finally, we want to get more creative and we want to find these common goals. So I really, again, encourage that partnership. I look forward to continuing that partnership, and I really thank all of you for your time and look forward to your questions later today. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Maybe there were some eyebrows raised when EPA got introduced, but all I can say is I keep getting invited back to these wonderful meetings. I've personally been, this is my third NACD meeting, national meeting, and we participate in a lot of the regional meetings as well. So I'm really glad to be here and see so many friends in the audience. EPA has been partnering with NACD for many years, and that's because we share a similar mission. We want clean and safe water for multiple uses and to support the nation's economy and to produce food and to enjoy land conservation as well. So that's why we make great partners. One of the cornerstones of the partnership is our long history of working together with state non-point source and source water protection programs to identify ways to improve soil and water quality by keeping nutrients on the farms and out of the waterways. We see the value of conservation partners as the foundation on which to build long-lasting associations. It's obvious how all of you working at the local level do collaborations as a daily way of business, and you work with agencies, organizations, private landowners, and you recognize how key this multi-party collaboration is to land conservation efforts. So I want to talk briefly this morning about some of the key programs that EPA has that we rely on NAC members to help implement on the ground. So you all know what the 319 program is. I know there's always great sessions here talking about 319 projects. I was at some yesterday. The states distribute EPA. We give the states funds. The states distribute them to the local level for planning, technical assistance, on-the-ground best management practices. We have seen more than 500 waterways that have improved their water quality through non-point source projects, and conservation districts have played a role in almost half of these waterways. So we really applaud your efforts in moving forward protection of water quality. Roles that conservation districts have successfully carried out include being a watershed project coordinator, helping initiate local watershed groups and priority watersheds, encouraging collaboration between local watershed groups and other stakeholders, informing and maybe even leading the development of watershed plans that make the most effective use of local, state, and federal resources to reduce nutrient loadings. You help state and federal agencies reach the key farmers in your district because you know who they are. You know who's going to be the most receptive to putting in these conservation practices or where they'll get the most benefit. You provide technical assistance and outreach to landowners. You're the liaison between water quality agencies and the local districts, and you participate in state or local project advisory committees. Those are just some of the ways in which you help with our 319 project. So, we want to continue that valuable partnership. We also rely on your work for source water protection. It's one thing to have to clean up nutrient pollution, but the best thing is to prevent it. And by source water protection that involves a lot of land conservation efforts, we can prevent degradation from occurring and make sure especially that we have clean and safe drinking water. So we're really happy that NACD is part of our Source Water Collaborative. We have 25 members now, and NACD is a key participant in that. In particular, the Source Water Collaborative partnered with NACD and NRCS to produce an online collaborative toolkit protecting drinking water sources through agriculture conservation. So if you haven't seen that, I urge you to take a look at it. I'm sure it's on your NACD website as well as ours. And the toolkit is for anyone interested in working with conservation districts and NRCS state conservationists to protect drinking water resources. So really excited about that collaboration. And in particular, I want to thank John Larson and Susan Schultz for their essential role in getting that toolkit out. And the NACD website has a water drop symbol to indicate the appropriate state-level contact for interested water partners who want to work in source water collaboration. So please take a look at all of that if you haven't already. Conservation districts are also playing an important role in the National Water Quality Initiative, which is a partnership between EPA and NRCS, where we're pairing up our federal funds, rolling them out to the state level to work in priority watersheds to put best management practices on the ground to reduce nutrients, and then to also do monitoring to see what kind of effects those best management practices are having over time. This has been a very successful program. It's been going on for a couple of years. We hope to expand it in the future, and we really rely on conservation districts to help us with the on-the-ground implementation of the National Water Quality Initiative. It's a great program that showcases the impact of smart watershed planning, which I know is something all of the districts promote, and also stakeholder engagement, because it involves a variety of stakeholders from bottom up. We hope to continue to showcase successes from the National Water Quality Initiative as we move forward, and certainly as we start to see results, which often take a few years to manifest themselves in the water body itself once you put the conservation practices in. But I think that's going to be a really important message, to be able to show the successes so we can get more involvement across the landscape. We also work very closely with local districts and with NRCS through our Gulf of Mexico Hypoxia Task Force. So this task force is comprised of the main stem states along the Mississippi, from the headwaters all the way down to the Gulf, with a goal of reducing nutrient inputs in the Gulf of Mexico watershed so that we can decrease the hypoxic zone, the zone of low to no oxygen within the Gulf. Each of the task force states has developed a nutrient reduction strategy tailored to their state and working with their local stakeholders. And as part of this process, each state will or already has identified priority watersheds to start nutrient reductions in. The overall goal is a 45% reduction in nitrogen and phosphorus going into the Mississippi River watershed. That's huge. That's going to take a lot of work on point sources and non-point sources, and voluntary as well as regulatory actions to decrease the amount of nutrients. So we're really going to be relying on the work of conservation districts to help in these priority watersheds get practices on the ground and monitor their effects. So as co-chair of the task force, I challenge NACD local districts to join with us, build upon the great partnership we already have, and expand the work of local conservation districts. So we are reaching out to you to ask you to partner with task force states, if you're not already doing so, to help in implementation of state nutrient strategies in these priority watersheds. And later today at 1:30, we have a session on reining in nutrients, and we're going to have some more information about the Hypoxia Task Force and roles that you can all play. So we're really looking to expand partnerships within the Hypoxia Task Force, and we would love to have NACD as one of those partners. We just recently signed an MOU with land-grant universities and the Hypoxia Task Force so that the land-grant universities can provide support for both critical research and also outreach through the extension services to the communities along the Mississippi River Basin to help them with these nutrient reduction efforts. The task force is also working with farmers and agricultural organizations, businesses, cities and communities, and some NGOs to try to increase the partnerships and our reach to get these practices on the ground and to improve water quality both locally and then down in the Gulf of Mexico, because the nice thing about these reduction efforts is it helps in the local community as well, but it's also going to help the Gulf. So really want to step up the work we do with NACD in that regard. Also, nutrient monitoring is very important. So it's great to put these practices in, but we need to show results. so that others will get inspired. I always, when I go around the country and I hear a lot of farmers and landowners say, if you can show me that putting in these practices is going to directly help water quality, then I'm all for it. I'll do it. So monitoring becomes very important, but monitoring takes money and time. So right now, the federal agencies have out a nutrient sensor challenge. I hope some of you have heard about it. If not, I can talk about it more after this session. But what we've put out is an open innovation competition to accelerate development and deployment of affordable remote sensors that measure nutrients in streams and rivers. And what the challenge is, we're looking for some company that can produce these remote sensing nutrient monitors for under $5,000 a piece, and that can be, totally remote. You can look through your computer at your desk to see the results. And where NACD and the conservation districts can come in is that part of the challenge, it's not a money challenge, but we're going to offer free testing for the people who develop these nutrient sensor challenges, and conservation districts are the perfect people to engage in that kind of beta testing. So we'd like to talk with you more about that. There's registration until mid-March to participate in beta testing of the sensor design. So really like to talk with you more about getting you involved in that. Finally, I want to talk about some other joint EPA-NACD efforts that have been so valuable in helping with water quality. Strengthening the links between NACD conservation districts and on-farm advisors using certified crop advisors has been really helpful. The Smithsonian Waterways Initiative that looks at interactions in water-based environments with the goal of increasing awareness about the environment and eco-stewardship. We've worked with NACD on that. The Farmer Heroes Initiative, which I hope many of you are aware of, and probably some people in this room are featured in it. That has just been a fantastic, positive example of how we can all work together to improve water quality, and we feature various farmers who have put in conservation practices, improve water quality, and it's on the NACD website and EPA's website, and we talk about these examples as we go around the country, because that's how you spread the word. And finally, the work that NACD has done with us on the Clean Water Rule, or as you may know it, Waters of the U.S. Rule. You sat down with us, you told us what your issues were, and we've listened, and you will see that when the final rule comes out, a lot of the things you told us are reflected in changes from the proposal to make it more clear, more precise, and work for farmers and for the whole community in protecting water quality. So again, thank you for the opportunity to be here. You can see we do a lot of joint work on conservation. I'll be happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We appreciate our panel this morning. We do have just a couple of minutes for comments or questions from the audience. If not, we're going to have our panelists available at the speaker's table if you'd like to talk to them one-on-one. Just a couple of comments as we wrap up to make sure that we stay within our time limits here. Kristen, when you were talking about being the Department of Defense and what does that have to do with conservation, well, we full well know that in Texas because our State Soil and Water Conservation Board, NRCS and all, have had an ongoing relationship with Fort Hood and others. They have a large tank range down there that we've done some projects with to help them bring some problems that they had where they were crossing waterways and things and make it to where they could carry on their training, and yet we could still take care of any problems that we had, so we work very well. And in my hometown, we've got a major Air Force installation. We work very closely with them, and they're tremendous neighbors, and certainly we get a lot done by being partners with them and certainly not adversaries. And really and truly, I think a lot of this discussion this morning reminds us that we've got a lot of people out there with similar goals that we have, a lot of agencies. They may have a little different terminology, a little bit different approach. And one of the things that we've done as a member of the State Stormwater Conservation Board now in Texas, we have utilized our association with TCEQ, which is basically our state EPA. And they have been very helpful in helping us go out into the country, make contact with landowners. It's just, sometimes it's a little better relationship when you put that buffer zone in there and bring it back locally and kind of take the old federal boogaboo out of it, because it's frightening. When you hear EPA, that's like IRS. You get frightening. But when we consider that we do have a lot of common goals and that we can move forward on those levels, I think it helps us all. And I really think that's the overall of what this panel discussion is about today, whether it be the BLM or the DOD or any of these agencies, U.S. Forest Service. We've had a long-going relationship with them with a lot of projects. We're going to have these panelists available. We'd like for you to discuss them, get acquainted with them. It's always nice to know somebody when you've got a question and can call, and certainly I appreciate being able to make that relationship happen today. And we got a microphone? We got a question? I'm looking at it like, all right, go ahead from the audience.
My question would be for Ms. Galinsky. Tim Palmer, co-chair of the NACD Natural Resource Policy Committee. And Ms. Galinsky, there's been a long comment period and for the final rule, discussing the final rule on clean waters in the United States. And I hope there's been a realization of the difficulty of developing a rule that of a common nature for such a varied landscape as exists across our country. My question would be how would the EPA continue to utilize the knowledge of local conservation, the conservation districts' knowledge of their surroundings, their population, their economic needs, to help attain the goals that would be demonstrated through a new rule?
Okay, thank you. I think this is on. Thanks for that question. So we did receive over 1 million comments on the Clean Water Rule, Water's the U.S. rule, and of those, about 18,000 were unique comments. The others were more mail-in campaigns, but even more important than that was the outreach we did all over the country, and with organizations such as yourselves who gave us, we did some give and take and really thoughtful comments and suggestions for how we might better define and clarify what our intentions were. So we've taken all that to heart. We will be producing a final rule this spring, and then we'll be looking to folks such as yourselves to do some outreach again in the implementation of that rule. But we are really sharpening our pencils and making more clear what we mean, and also all the exemptions that have been preserved, especially for agriculture, but for other areas too, and for urban stormwater as well. So you'll find a final rule that is a little bit more in plain English about what it means.
Other comments or questions? Once again, we will make our panel available to you for the next little while. Some of them will be here in different sessions throughout the day so that you can develop that relationship. And the one thing, do we have another one? We're having a hard time seeing from up here, so go right ahead.
Sorry, this is Michael Crowder from Washington State. I'm still hoarse from the Super Bowl 2 days ago. And I will say run the ball. Just run the ball from the one. It's terrible. Dr. Galinsky, I'd like to, it really is terrible. It's horrible.
I'm not sure there's anybody up here that can do anything about that.
That's my only question. Thank you. Dr. Galinsky, I'd like to follow up on Tim Palmer's question. Again, it's Michael Crowder from Washington State. You and I have had personal conversations about the 3%, and there's people here that don't understand that, and I haven't been able to explain that very well. Could you expand on that? And I would like to thank you for coming to this group for input, because I've seen you at 3 different meetings, and we appreciate the EPA coming and listening, and we hope we can do that in the future. But if you can explain how that 3% increase in jurisdiction, please.
Sure. Thanks, Michael. So what Michael's referring to is when we put out the proposed clarification of the definition of waters of the United States, we estimated that there would be a 3% change in jurisdictional determinations under the clarification. That being that there would be, on average, 3% more positive jurisdictional determinations based on the rule. And the question is, well, how did we figure that out? And that was based on past jurisdictional determinations that the Corps of Engineers has made, and then looking at the proposal, would they change those based on the proposal, either for or against? And on average, that came out to a 3% change, recognizing that in some areas it would be even 100% change just because certain core districts didn't consider certain ditches as jurisdictional, for instance. So what the rule is trying to do is to clarify and make more consistent things like ditches and ephemeral streams so that you don't have that variation in core districts and determinations. So as I said, on average, that came out to a 3% change. But again, recognizing that in your community it might be more.
Thank you. Anyone else? Comments or questions? Once again, I think the theme of this panel discussion, we have another?
I'm Barry Lake from Tennessee. The other two questions have answered a lot of what I was interested in, but does EPA, we always hear the horror stories. Is there some way that EPA could put out more publicity on the good stories, the success stories? Because
you wouldn't be against that, would
no,
you?
I'm all for it. Well, I mean, that's our whole idea in, the Farmer Heroes and the successes of the National Water Quality Initiative and things like that, is to show how EPA is working in communities on voluntary practices for land conservation. And yes, that is what we're trying to do. But, the bad news makes press. But through you all spreading the word of the work that we do together in communities, I think can go a long way to show what good partners we are.
And that would apply to every agency, I would assume, the very same situation, telling that story. And I think that brings up an excellent point, and we'll try to wrap this up so we can move along, stay online. And I'm so glad, we got one more? Okay. I'm so glad. Let's take that, and then we'll wrap this up.
Yes. Is there any way that we can work a little closer with the DOD to know when programs are coming out so that we can announce that on our side too, kind of a simultaneous thing to get better information out and get it out quicker?
Absolutely. We would be more than happy to work with NACD, and in fact, we have really worked hard to reestablish that relationship. As I mentioned in my comments, we've been some of the things we're working on right now resulted from coordination and work in partnership with this group several years ago, and they're like in many federal agencies, there have been some changes in folks, and we're really working hard to get back out there. But we would be more than happy to partner and share information with anyone in this room. I do have contact information at our booth here and some additional information on our programs. But we do provide all of the funding through the REPI program, goes through the military services to the installation. So the installations on the ground are the focus of how those funds are executed. And those partnership agreements, those cooperative agreements with our partners are executed at that local level. So the simplest way to get connected to a particular project or partnering effort is to engage with a local installation. And myself and my staff would be more than happy to help you get in contact with the right folks on the ground to help with that. But that's really how the program flows. It's really a locally funded program, all those dollars flowing down through DOD. But I would be happy to share additional information about those opportunities with anyone who's interested.
I think another focus of this panel discussion today, and I would address this to the panel members, and I promise you this is preaching to the choir because they already know this because they've been involved with our organization. NACD and all the way down through local conservation districts are excellent ways to reach out into the community and apply a lot of the things that we've been talking about today. Our district directors across this great land have an excellent relationship with their local producers, their landowners, their local government officials and all. And I think it's vitally important that we not only as Conservation District directors all the way up through NACD, our national organization, work with you when you have something that you need applied. Coming back in the other direction is an excellent way to get conservation on the ground and move these priorities forward. We thank you for being here today. We appreciate you taking time. I know some of you will be around for some different sessions, and we would encourage members to visit with you one-on-one. Thank you very much for your participation this morning. Mr. Chairman, we're going to turn the program back over to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's give Barry and the panelists one more hand for doing such a good job. I'd like to make an announcement for tomorrow. The RC&Ds will have a meeting from 8 to 11 o'clock tomorrow morning in the Bacchus Suite on the 4th floor. So FYI, that was something I don't think was in the program. At this time, we're going to go ahead and do the drawing for the first-timers. Before I make the drawing, let me make it clear that the first-timer that gets drawn must be present. If not, we'll go ahead and pick another name. Is Cindy Dunn here from Kentucky? I guess I should say what she won, shouldn't I? I'm going to make sure it's the right prize and I don't give her the wrong thing. That was the Kindle, correct? Okay. We're going to do another drawing here in a few minutes for the Conservation Expo Bingo. Do we need to readjust the furniture yet, or can we do that later? Okay, keep moving. I'm going to introduce our next speaker then, and I guess we should comment that our wardrobe designer worked to make sure that we would be dressed properly for this. We sort of have the same tie and shirt on, as you'll see here in a few minutes. But it's now my great pleasure to introduce NRCS Chief Jason Weller to discuss the vision of the future of conservation. Jason has served as chief of the NRCS since July 2013. As chief, he oversees programs that help protect the environment, preserve our natural resources, and improve agricultural sustainability through voluntary private lands conservation. He leads a staff of more than 10,000 employees across the country and manages a budget of about $4 billion. From December 2012 to July 2013, Jason served as acting chief of NRCS. Before assuming this role, he served as acting associate chief of conservation and as chief of staff, where he worked alongside Chief Dave White and the agency's national and state leaders to plan and implement strategic conservation initiatives to conduct the annual business operations of the agencies. Prior to joining NRCS, Jason served as staff member for the U.S. House Appropriations Subcommittee on Agriculture and on the U.S. House Budget Committee. He's also held positions at the White House Office of Management and Budget and in the California State Legislature. Please help me welcome Chief Weller.
All right, good morning, everyone. Thanks for sticking to this part of the program. I think we had a really great morning listening to Dave, and of course he's an incredible speaker, very passionate, and he really laid out a charge for all of us. It wasn't just for us here at NACD, it's for our state conservation agencies, for the Resource Conservation Development Councils, and for my colleagues here from NRCS. So really a call to action. And so what I want to talk about in the next few minutes is sort of big picture. I want to dial it back a little bit. I'll try to the extent I can, even though I'm a federal employee and I like acronyms, I'm going to stay out of the acronyms. I'm going to stay out of just minutia and try and big picture. Kind of where are we going? And then I'm going to bring it back a little bit and talk about what this all means collectively. So there are going to be 3 themes I'm going to be talking about in the next few minutes. Big picture, these are trends that aren't really going to surprise you, but I really want to underscore the importance of these themes. There's some big things happening right now in the field of conservation, here in the United States, but globally. And if we're not on board now, today, I really fear where we're going to be 10 years from now. We as a conservation movement, as a collaborative, as a partnership, we've got to continue our focus and our engagement, of course, at the local level, in our counties, and our districts, and our states. But we also got to think about big picture, what's happening in our country, but also globally in the field of conservation and agricultural production. But before we get into the specifics of those 3 themes, it's also really important to celebrate successes. So this month actually marks the 1-year anniversary of the 2014 Farm Bill. And if you think about a year ago, where we were at this time, the president was just about to sign this historic bill that took 3 years to put together. And then as a partnership, all of us together, state agencies, districts, district employees, NRCS professionals, councils, we all came together and we helped put on the landscape in a matter really of only 4 months. We worked with 45,000 different producers, helped put in place through the Farm Bill programs 45,000 contracts. Together we helped put on the landscape and invest into $2.6 billion worth of conservation just in 1 year alone, just through the Farm Bill programs, touching 21 million acres of land across the United States in a matter of months. This is an incredible accomplishment and something I think we all should collectively celebrate. It was a lot of work, a little bit of stress, but if you think about what we were able to accomplish given our existing infrastructure, given our existing delivery capacity, in a matter of months we can pivot, turn, take a new Farm Bill, and deliver on the promise of that Farm Bill to landowners across the United States. It's a huge accomplishment. So then where do we go with this Farm Bill? Where do we go as a conservation movement? So as I said, there are going to be 3 themes I want to talk about. As Dave talked about in the previous panel as well, there's going to be a lot of very common threads here. I want to really come back to talking about why we were created. Chief White talked about that. Hugh Hammond Bennett's vision from the early 20th century, 1905, and his vision to create the Soil Erosion Service, Soil Conservation Service, NRCS, the Soil and Water Conservation Districts, state conservation agencies. And it all came back to what we were created to do was to take our knowledge of the land, the knowledge of the soils and the water resources, our knowledge of farming and ranching, and share that expertise with a private landowner on a voluntary basis. The medium we did that through, the way we did that was through conservation planning. The last 10 years, last 12 years, there's been a lot of focus on Farm Bill programs and acronyms, SOUPs, and all this activity, which is excellent, and those are incredible resources that we should be incredibly thankful for because we're getting huge solutions delivered on the land. But we need to come back to what was our keystone, the foundation stone, what created this movement, and that's conservation planning. Chief Bennett, when he wrote in the 1940s about the principles of soil conservation, he talked about 4 key elements of conservation planning. It's first just considering the capability of those acres, those soils, and the geography and the climate, considering the capabilities of the farm implements, the facilities, the machinery, and the economic situation of that farm. He also then talked about the farmer's willingness to try out different practices, different farming practices, livestock stocking rate practices, conservation practices, and fourth, put that ranch, that farm in the context of the landscape, in the watershed, in the overall ecosystem. Those are 4 basic tenets that today we still use every single day. When he wrote about this 70, 80 years ago. And so what are we doing about it today? So today, we really want to reinvigorate our focus in and investment in conservation planning. I'm going to talk about some of the things we have going on. But this is something we're all going to be doing together. It's too important not to be. So the leadership of our shared organizations of NACD, NRCS, Employees Association, NASCA, RC&D councils came together last month, and we had a National Conservation Planning Summit We invited district employees, district conservationists, some of the best leaders in conservation planning who are practiced in this art form. And this is really important because they're practitioners of this. As you all know, there's as much science as there is art to conservation planning. It's beyond just understanding the physical properties and the chemical properties and biological properties, the engineering systems, and the agronomic practices. You also have to know, at bottom line, how to listen, how to encourage, how to support, and be creative. And only a seasoned planner can do those things. And we have a lot of examples of really effective planners. But a lot of our best planners are retiring. They're leaving at least the federal workforce. All that knowledge, all that expertise and passion is leaving. So we have a new generation then stepping up to the plate. And we need to ensure we're going to be supporting that new generation at least as effectively as we did today's generation. If not, we have to do actually a better job. Better tools, better training, better certification, better communication and support, and really better estimate of the value of conservation planning. And that's what the Conservation Planning Summit has done. It's really invigorated this conversation. But beyond this being just a navel-gazing exercise, we'll sort of ponder the imponderables, what we're laying out is a real charge to get the leadership together, to get practitioners engaged, and really we think together we come up with a joint shared vision for the training, the tools, the processes, the approaches for effective conservation planning. So we're all doing it off the same song sheet. We're all doing it together. We're also trying to, within NRCS, modernize how we support conservation planning. There's been a lot of talk about the Conservation Delivery Streamlining Initiative. Sorry, it's an acronym, CDSI. Well, I'm very proud today to talk about we've delivered. The first leg of this, there are 3 legs. The first leg is called the Client Gateway. I'll talk about that in a second. The second leg is the Conservation Desktop, and the third is the Mobile Planner. So let me just briefly talk about these real quick. We have experts here. There's a great booth outside here. If you guys, I really commend you, please go by and check it out. You can see it real time how the system works. Web Client Gateway. So there's been polls done in how farmers and ranchers do business today, and they do, a lot of folks increasingly are doing business online with their seed retailers, with their suppliers, their consultants, the whole thing. But they say, well, no, they don't like to work with the government online. Well, I don't think that's really true, because they can't work with the government online. So what we've actually turned on is, perhaps modestly is calling, it's the Amazon of conservation. We have turned on a new system that empowers our customers to access their conservation business online, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. They can call up their operation. They can call up all their contracts they've done with us. They can call up their conservation plans. They can sign contracts online. They can request assistance, send in questions. They can schedule appointments. You can identify field and tracks using basic GIS tools. So they can say, this is the field I'm interested in. Here are the resource concerns I want to talk about. I want to have a DC come by and visit with me about it. You can apply for a program online. You can track your payments. It's basically all that administrative work that we're now empowering and giving that information to our customers. But also then it's a big deal for our field office employees, because it's putting all in one place, all that information about one of our customers, all the plans and contracts in one place. And one of the biggest, in my opinion, is wastes of time we have, at least our agency, and it's certainly true for district employees too. What do we all do during the month of September? We're generally in a truck chasing people around the county trying to get signatures. It's a crazy waste of time, of talent and their time and resources. And it's also the time of year farmers don't want to sign paper. They got things to do. So instead, we now have a state-of-the-art system where we empower our customers to be able to access their information online. So we've turned this on. We've invited in around 300 what we're calling early adopters across the entire country. They're testing this out, and it's live, their practices, their operations today. We're trying to get our arms around how's the system working, trying to get as many the wrinkles ironed out as possible. And we're looking then to do a nationwide push to open this thing up, make it available to everyone in the coming month or two. I'm really excited about what's in store. And then we're also going to be talking about, in the future, about then the Conservation Desktop, which is going to be aligning all of our planning tools in a seamless suite. So instead of people having to be database jockeys and monkeying with all these different tool calculators, it's all seamlessly integrated. So you get that all process out of the way, get them back to focus on planning. And the third component is the mobile planner. You give them the equipment, whether it's a laptop or a mobile device, get back out in the field. sit in the cab of the truck with a rancher or the farmer, walk their fields with them, start to gather the data, have all the information you need to start the good conservation planning dialogue in person as opposed to having to go back to the field office and be a desk jockey. Let's get our people back out in the field doing what they're actually trained and what they love doing. Soil health is in this medium of conservation planning too. Incredible accomplishments. Think about where we were 3 years ago and where we are today as a nation on soil health, what NACD has led on this movement, what NRCS has helped to lead on this movement. It's a locally grown prairie fire focused on soil health and the benefits this means for ranching and farming across the country. But really what this is conservation planning. You're bringing together suites of practices, working as a system, understanding the physical, chemical, and biological properties of the soil to either maintain or boost yield, but building resilience into that soil landscape to help those producers be sustainable as possible over the long term. What we need is more examples of soil health for not just croplands. We need range health, pasture health, forest health. This is re-energized our field employees, our field offices. This is also helping to re-energize our customers. This is an example of effective conservation planning. And we need to push out this approach on communication and engagement and excitement across all that we do. Beyond just better tools for employees, we need better plans for our customers. This is also something we're working on at the agency. We're calling it resource stewardship planning. It's a fancy way of saying basically aligning all of our tools, putting it into a conservation plan, and giving that information in real time to a customer to then have really informed investments in conservation. We're piloting this approach in 11 states. Many of your district offices are working with us. Your employees are part of this pilot. We're bringing state-of-the-art tools as well as tried and long trusted tools to put together, like this is an example here. We can go by field and tract. And by field and tract, you get feedback across 4 key indicators. Resource health, really indicator proxy for soil health, but because we call it resource health because it includes pastures, cropland, and rangeland. What's your management of that soil? Water, both quantity and quality, air, and habitat. And what you see there is the blue line. Then you get real-time feedback. What the blue line represents is the NRCS stewardship threshold, essentially our stewardship standard for these different mediums. And so then you can go by field and tract. In this case, in this hypothetical example, this producer's doing a fantastic job through rotational grazing, good pasture management. He's got the soils locked down. He's got the air quality improved. The wildlife habitat's off the chart. The one issue then as a planner is groundwater issues, leaching of nutrients, phosphorus in this case, into the groundwater table. Well, then as a planner, you can then engage with that customer in a really good dialogue. Okay, here's what we prescribe. Here's what we recommend for this pasture or for this part of the cropland area. Cover crops, good nutrient management, good different tillage practices. We can go after this phosphorus issue. Really excited about where this is going to take us. Second theme, so I've talked a lot about planning. Second theme then is partnerships. Again, we've talked about this morning. This whole conference is about. We've also heard a lot about how we don't have the resources we need. The last 4 years or so, you guys know it's been rough for the federal government. I know you guys know. I know it's been tough in the state government and the districts as well. Dave talked about the huge challenges we have as a nation, as a world, really. So without the resources that we can, on our own, deliver for environmental health, crop production, range health, we need to then bring new partners to the table. And we need to be smarter about working together in the landscape. Really think very concretely about how we work better together with cities and water utilities, for-profit companies, philanthropic organizations, wildlife groups, different organizations that traditionally we haven't had a lot of work with, been more accidental than purposeful. But I think through a really concerted focus on partnership and partnering, it's amazing what we can uncork. And so I'm not going to get into belabor it in a lot of detail this morning, but one example out of this then is the new Regional Conservation Partnership Program in the Farm Bill. This is an approach. I'm not going to say the approach. What this is really kind of more underscoring the partnership we've had for 80 years with the districts and state agencies. But what this has done is actually invited a lot of new people to the table, historically have been on the sidelines or have not really had an entree point. How do we get into the dialogue? How do we engage? So big picture, we laid out a real challenge, 4 key factors we laid out. Number one, we really want to encourage participation. We want to bring in a lot of new partners to the table. We wanted those partners to bring really excellent solutions to their communities, locally led conservation. We wanted to have real great innovation in terms of how they're tackling those solutions in their community, and we also then wanted as much significant contribution as possible. We laid out the marker. It would be great to have a one-to-one match in terms of federal investment with contribution, both cash and in-kind support. We didn't know what was going to happen. We held a sign-up, huge response. Over 600 project ideas from every state in the union, and they requested over $2.8 billion in need. But what was exciting is what they were bringing to the table. Thousands of partnerships across the whole United States, now excited and focused on a common goal in a community, in a watershed, in a forest. And they also were willing to bring $3 billion in match. And that's just our first sort of like stumbled across this, like, oh, holy smokes. $6 billion and just like sort of tripped over it. It was a huge indicator of what the potential is with this approach. Well, if you communicate effectively, you lay out some common goals, and then you stand back and you let the locally led partnership come up with project design, magic happens. And that's what we then, this is an indicator of what we've been able to fund. The first round, we had a total of $370 million thereabout. We awarded 115 different project ideas. Again, projects in every state in the union, including Puerto Rico, from small scale to huge scale, multi-state, regional to very small scale in a particular county. And districts led the way in many of these projects, and they participate in virtually all the projects. Leadership from Alaska to Oregon to California to New Mexico to Connecticut to Delaware. Across the country, districts are in the lead, envisioning how this approach to partnership can work in their communities, work within their jurisdictions, but crucially then also start thinking about how we work together across state lines, different political jurisdictions. Again, an indicator of an approach that we really have to get smart about and be energized about and totally motivated to get on top of. The third theme is going to be engaging the private marketplace. So bear with me here. I'm going to get maybe metaphysical with you guys for a second. Just bear with me. So stepping back, way back a little bit, you think about the challenges that Chief White laid out in terms of the need for food production, and you think about the land base and the resource base we have to produce that food and fiber that we're going to need. But on a shrinking land base, a lot less land, some of our best soils getting developed. Okay, how do we do this? Well, in my view, there are sort of three main pillars that support the health of that natural resource system. The ecology, the soils and the waters that support all that we depend upon for drinking water, for food supply, for recreation, for clean air. Number one is what we all do is assistance. It's the technical financial assistance that we provide to landowners. That's one column. The second column, we talked a little bit about today too, is the regulatory infrastructure. The Clean Water Act, Clean Air Act, Endangered Species Act, NEPA, RCRA. You go across it. There's a lot of regulatory mechanisms there. And I don't know if it's just me, but I've detected sort of a shift in the winds over the last decade or so. The social support for some of these two pillars, maybe not as what it once was. On the federal level, the tide going out on the federal budget has actually gone out quicker than even I would have expected. It's been a very stringent few years. But even on the regulatory front, there's not a huge, real hue and cry to add additional regulatory elements. It's more about making the regulatory mechanisms we have in place today at least work effectively. But if anything, there's increasingly pressure, as was indicated and Ellen talked about a little bit, a lot of pressure on just maintaining the ground we've gained through the regulatory approach. So how are we going to do this? So then there's the third column, which is what I want to talk about here for a second. And it's engaging private capital, engaging the marketplace. This is a slumbering giant, which is starting to wake up. And we all need to get on board and engage with this giant. Or my fear is it's going to move on, and it may not necessarily move in a direction that will be beneficial for landowners, for districts, or for conservation. So there are three elements to this way I think about it. Number one is investing in market mechanisms, which is sort of a fancy way of saying buying and selling products. And what products do farmers and ranchers grow? They grow food, grain, and they grow livestock, and they grow fiber. So they grow food and fiber. But they also produce other products that are increasingly becoming really valuable. Water, air, habitat. And so as we're moving into this new era of scarcity, scarce water resources, scarce soil resources, scarce habitat, all those things are starting to accrue a value. It's basic supply and demand. As demand increases, supply recedes, there starts going to be real value placed on things like water and habitat and air. So then how do we figure out how to help farmers and ranchers sell other products they produce, water and air and habitat? That's what this is all about. And so we all need to figure out how do we support farmers in this approach. So a voluntary approach can help deliver on our regulatory goals, but also really societal goals for clean water, but also for abundant food. So an example of this is one of the really exciting. It's the first ever in the U.S. interstate water quality trading project in the Ohio River Basin, including Indiana, Ohio, and Kentucky. Soil and water conservation districts led on this and are integral to its success. The basic premise is you have point sources, water utilities. They have a choice to make. They got to reduce their loadings of nutrients into the water, into the river, so they can either invest in really expensive capital, or maybe they go upriver and pay a farmer for cleaner water. So that cleaner water that a farmer can produce it turns out to be a lot cheaper, and it's also really good for the farmer. It's better tillage systems, nutrient management, help them optimize their use of nutrients, field borders, different tillage systems. That's really good for their economic bottom line, for their resource sustainability, but then it then provides a new income stream because they're now also farming clean water. They're getting a payment from a point source. Another example of this is with carbon. We've worked with, and the district's worked with us up in North Dakota and Ducks Unlimited, but also with General Motors. First ever transaction with General Motors where they actually bought carbon credits with ranchers in North Dakota. Working with DU, they helped develop the methodology to say if you keep this soil and this climate in grass, here's what we estimate in terms of total carbon sequestration. So you put an easement in place so you assure that grass is going to be there forever. You put in place good grazing practices, so crucially it's still working lands, but you keep that working land in grass. Rancher can still make a living running livestock off it, but now they're also getting a payment, in this case from General Motors, for the carbon that they're going to be putting in their soils, which is a positive feedback loop. Improving the health of their soils, improving the resilience of those soils. They also now get another income stream. Second big thing happening in private marketplace, and this is engaging and harnessing the power of consumers. This is a big deal, folks. We all got to get on board. What you see here, this is just a small constellation of all these organizations that are starting to think about this. And one example of this is the Field to Market group that involves ag retailers, agribusiness, commodity associations, wildlife organizations, conservation groups, and they're thinking about selling conservation, bottom line. So whether that's from a product on a shelf in a supermarket or a store, or more about a commodity that wants to be traded, increasingly they want to help communicate to the public, but also to buyers of those products, the type of stewardship that was in place. And beyond just talking about it sort of in an abstract sense, they really want to know the metrics. They want to know the types of practices and systems in place. This is a big deal. Think about that. If we can engage the American multi-trillion-dollar economy in buying conservation, what would that do to ensuring the health of our soils, the health of our water, the health of our habitat? This is a big movement. And so I strongly encourage that we all figure out our role, and I think there's a really important role for districts to play in this. Because these businesses, they know how to package food, they know how to sell food, they don't know generally how to grow food, and they certainly don't know about resource conservation. But you all do. And you all have the local relationships with your farmers and ranchers. You all know what it takes to produce sustainably grown food. And there's a lot of value add that districts can provide to help Field to Market, whether it's this program or other programs. Huge opportunities for districts. And the third and final, this is the sleeping giant, slumbering giant. There are big institutional investors. Credit Suisse, JP Morgan Chase, GE Capital, Goldman Sachs, that are starting to take a look at putting real money into conservation. So some firms have taken a look at what have been the conservation investments recently. from institutional investors like this, and it's been relatively small. The Nature Conservancy partnered with J.P. Morgan Chase, and they did a survey of institutional investors looking back over the last decade. And what they found is over the last 4 or 5 years, globally, there's around $23 billion in investments into conservation finance assets and tools. The exciting thing, though, is that from institutional investors like these folks up here on the screen, it's growing at an average annual rate of over 26% every year. So at the beginning of the decade, over a 5-year period, institutional investors put around $50 to $60 million total into this type of conservation approach. Over the last 5 years, they put close to $500 million in this approach, and it's growing geometrically. So Credit Suisse did a survey, and again, globally, because these are global investors, they found that there's a total global demand for conservation finance of $300 to $400 billion. There's a gap then in funding globally from government and from institutions around $200 to $300 billion. And they expect these types of institutions to fill that void. We're talking about conservation easements, ranching systems, forest health practices, timber management, cropland production, all the things that we work in. These institutions want to move serious money into this arena. And again, there's a moment in time, these markets that I've talked about earlier, they're nascent, they're beginning, they're taking their baby steps, but they're starting to evolve really quickly. These folks are really smart. They're looking to make money. God bless capitalism. It's what helped create this nation. We need to figure out how to harness the power of capitalism, harness the power of these institutional investors to do good on the land, and ultimately to help private landowners take those resources, help upgrade their businesses. And one of the ways I like to talk about this with these institutional investors, come work with us. Come work with the districts in the locally led approach to conservation. Because in actuality, we're the world's biggest management consulting firm. Think about that. You guys are actual business consultants. You work one-on-one with family businesses, help them put together business plans to manage their assets, their soils, their livestock, their vegetation, their crops. You guys have a lot of sophisticated knowledge that these folks are hungry for. Huge opportunity. Okay, so what does all this mean? So I'm going to get metaphysical going with you guys here. All this conservation planning, partnerships, harnessing the power of private capital. Ultimately, this means working with a family, working with a single operation, a farm or a ranch. I had just in the last year some really amazing experiences. So there's something else that's really then important that we're investing in. And this is really then about the vibrancy and integrity of our nation. We have an incredibly diverse nation, rich cultural heritage, hundreds of languages, religions, ethnicities, and backgrounds. And it's rooted in the land. When people came to this country from Europe, from Africa, from Asia, they established themselves in the landscape on farms and ranches. And in a lot of cases, it's our conservation investments that keep those families and that rich cultural heritage in place. It's really about maintaining the tapestry of America. So this is an example. I met in New Mexico, and you see me visiting here with Levi Sanchez and Mary Sanchez of the Gallina Acequia in New Mexico. And the acequias, for those who don't know, are community irrigation ditches. They convey water through canals and irrigation ditches. But what's really cool is this thread with this acequia goes back millennia. They're descendants of Spanish colonists. Their families came here 400 years ago. When I asked Mr. Sanchez how long his family had been on the land, he just shook his head. He said, too long to remember. But actually, the word acequia is Arabic. It comes from the Moors when they invaded and took control of the Iberian Peninsula. They brought with them knowledge of hydrology and engineering and agronomics, agriculture, with them to Spain. They transferred that knowledge. And so the reverberations of that rich cultural heritage came with the Spanish colonists and are today living and vibrant in the United States of America. But these acequias are very modest, they're very proud, but they don't have a lot of resources. So the Gallina Sequia, there was a forest fire in the upland mountains, wiped out the trees. It then rained, sloughed off all that silt and debris, basically choked out their ditch, their sequia. In the midst of a drought for 5 years, they did not have water. And these are folks who are getting by on very little. 50 families depend upon this ditch. For the price of 1 center pivot, the Cubic Soil and Water Conservation District and NRCS went and worked with the sequia and upgraded, put in a permanent diversion, got water back in the ditch. And I happened to be there the first day water returned to that acequia in 5 years. We kept the tapestry intact. We kept those families on the land. Also in New Mexico, working with some of the first Americans, the first folks that settled this nation. In this case, the Santo Domingo Pueblo. And again, NRCS and the local approach worked with this Pueblo. Now on my right is the governor, Mr. Lovato. On my left is Everett Chavez, the liaison for the Pueblo. And I was there to help celebrate, but to learn about how EQIP was working on the Pueblo. Again, these are folks who have been on their lands for thousands of years. And it was the locally led approach, investments in conservation, that are helping to keep that Pueblo vibrant and intact and actually bring economic hope and vitality to an area that needs some help. They were irrigating their fields with what they called Indian ditches that had been there for hundreds of years, were weed choked, didn't work very well. The head of water they did flood irrigate. It would take days for the water to work its way across the field before they had fully irrigated. We put in gravity-fed subsurface pipelines. They can now irrigate those same fields in a matter of hours, saving water and time. They can now expand the acreage. You talk about a food desert. These folks are growing food in a desert. Really, the only access to fresh, nutritious food, their traditional foods they depend on for their diet as part of their rich cultural heritage, comes from their fields. They're able to bring back to their Pueblo opportunity and hope, keeping intact the tapestry and the wealth of their culture, but also the wealth and culture of our country. Right here you see Perry Rosso. He's from East Nantucket, Rhode Island. He's an oyster farmer. The Southern Rhode Island Conservation Districts are working with him. He's a farmer. He's growing oysters in state leased land. But it's the conservation approach that's helping Perry. He defines the term like a boss. If you have any chance to ever meet Perry, this guy's a boss. He is doing amazing work. But restoring oyster reefs, which is then good for aquatic habitat, good for water quality because oysters strip the nitrates out of the water. He's taking that produce. He has now a thriving restaurant. He now owns a farm that happened to be the farmstead for a pirate, for Christ's sakes. He's now growing fresh produce. He has a high tunnel practice in place. This guy is thriving. He's hiring all these people. It's an incredible story about maintaining the rich cultural heritage of Rhode Island and connection from the land to the sea. Percy and Emma Brown from Mississippi, modest farmers, livestock operators. These guys had to haul water to their animals with molasses buckets. We put in place through conservation, through the Strike Force effort, we're investing in poverty-stricken areas, a water trough with a float valve. Now it took backbreaking labor and a lot of wasted water and energy. They can now just do automatically, saving them a lot of time, put in a trough, heavy use pad, nutrient management. There's a reason they're smiling. We've improved their lives. We're keeping the tapestry intact. We're keeping them on the land. We're bringing economic hope to distressed areas. And finally, the woman there on the far right, her name is Janet Gale Harris. She has a farm, Aspen Grove Farm, outside of Frederick, Virginia, on a tributary of the Rappahannock. Really amazing story. Her ranch, her farm, has been in her family since 1763. She's sixth generation. Generations 7 and 8 are behind her. But what's really amazing is that on the background there, you see the tree line. That's Muddy Creek. So it's been called Muddy Creek as long as that land's been arable. It's been farmed. Because all that soil is rushing off. And it's a tributary of the Rappahannock. Rappahannock would take it in the Chesapeake Bay. Well, the day I was there after heavy rain, that creek was crystal clear because of the practices we put in place. But what's also really, to my point about maintaining the vibrancy and the culture and the rich heritage of our nation, is her farm, 6th generation, 1763, we put an easement in place, a mile up the road, Dunkin' Donuts, Chevron, you name it, the nasty growth and sprawl was on the march. Her farm is now going to be preserved and in place. Why is that important? Because when it snows in the wintertime and there aren't crops out in the fields, you can actually still see the divots from when the Army of the Potomac bivouacked on her farm. You could see where the tents were posted. When she renovated her homestead, her house, and they pulled up the floor, they had the original floorboards. The floorboards had blood. Her house had been used as a hospital. Men, brothers, and fathers who fought for this nation died in her home. That's a part of American history and culture and rich cultural heritage that you all are saving. Every day, there's stories like this. Big picture, we're on a path together. We have an incredible future, amazing opportunities. That path and its markers entice us to go up and on and over. But as we look forward and onward, we also have to look backward. Because it's our shared history, which is telling us where we need to go. We already know where we need to be. But together, we really got to harness the partnership together to maintain the tapestry and fabric of our nation, but also help a growing world feed itself and maintain our quality of life. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you, Chief Weller. It's now time to make the presentation of the 2014 NACD NRCS Earth Team Award. President Earl Garber, could you come up and please join the Chief?
All right. In part, what I was just talking about, this wouldn't happen, of course, without our employees, our federal and state and local employees. But it's also then about a network of volunteers, a community of passionate conservationists coming together. And that's what this award is about. It's the joint NACD NRCS award, recognizing those stewards, those volunteers who contribute hundreds of thousands of hours of their time to come help support the overall conservation mission. So last year, big picture, we had 26,000 volunteers nationally, and they volunteered over 318,000 hours of their time to help get conservation on the land. If you were to monetize that, that's equivalent to $7 million of donated conservation, which is an incredible asset and a true value and investment of love in what we do. And what this award recognizes then is one of the most effective districts in employing and using Earth Team volunteers to help them get their job done. So this year's recipient for the 2015 NACD NRCS Earth Team Volunteer Award goes to a district that employs 66 volunteers. And together, those 66 volunteers contributed 2,600 of their hours of their personal time in their district, in their community, to maintain that tapestry, that fabric, the economic vitality of their community. They engaged in educating youth. They helped promote programs. They helped NRCS and the districts get planning in place, recruit people to come into programs, and ultimately get conservation on the land. So we're very proud to announce that this year's recipient is the Stone County Conservation District of Mountain View, Arkansas. Let's give them a hand. So accepting this award is the District Secretary, Martha Blackwell, board members Terry Jo Stewart and Derek Littrell, the District Conservationist, Wendy Hendricks, and the NRCS State Conservationist, Mike Sullivan. Congratulations, everyone.
Thank you, and congratulations. And Jason and Earl, if you'd please stay on stage for a moment. I'd now like to ask Irene Moore, Olga Walter, and Shauna Joy to please join us on the stage. Irene must have been in the back of the room. You want me to make some comments? Yeah. All right. As you know, we've always had this core partnership of the 5 representatives who are here before you today. But it's my understanding that they've never actually sat down and formally signed a memorandum of agreement before. So at this time, we're going to take that historic moment and have our core partners sign this memorandum of agreement. So go to it. Of course, everything has to be done in triplicate. So.
So this is really important for a lot of reasons. That actually it was sort of an amazement to me is that actually our organizations had never really had this in place before. We've been working together 80 years, and by and large, somebody asks, well, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. What I think what this does is actually lays out our shared vision and our shared understanding of how the partnership is to work and to be integrated, and really then the shared leadership expectation for what this means in our states, and particularly in the field. So I'm really proud that we're able to come and develop this shared memorandum where all 5 organizations can come together, and together we're in alignment and total agreement about what locally led conservation, voluntary incentive-based conservation, what it means and how we get it done. So thank you, Earl and Lee. Thank you, everyone, for your leadership and your support and your vision in making this happen.
Thank you, Jason, and thank you, partners, for working together with us. And I think this is really a great event. You know, it's when you go home, you have your partnership. You have your group of conservation leaders that are trying to get this conservation on the ground out there in this incentive-based voluntary system. So take this as a guidance to you, that you go home, you get together, maybe you come up with your own agreement as to how you want to work to get this job done. And that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to show that we on the national level have been working together. Now we've made it formal, thanks to all of these organizations. So take it home and turn it into a great event in your state. Thank you.
Thank you, all of our partners. It's now time for our Conservation Expo bingo drawing. So if Beth Mason would make her way, and I think she's already on her way to the stage, we'll make that drawing for the new iPad Air. And again, you must be present. I left my glasses down there. Melinda Hauser.
Melinda Hauser from North Carolina.
And the winner is Melinda Hauser from North Carolina. Is Melinda Hauser here? I see some pointing back there, so I think we're good.
All right.
You want to take it? Congratulations, Melinda. And now, for a few final announcements before we go. First, we'd like once again to thank our following sponsors for their support of this meeting: Agri-Drainage Corporation, Apache, Bayer Crop Science, Bob Warner, Case IH, John Deere, the Maryland Association of Soil Conservation Districts, Monsanto, National Farmers Union, Plum Creek, Scotts Miracle-Gro, Syngenta, U.S. Forest Service, USDA, NRCS, and Verdesian. And now to all those exhibitors in our Conservation Expo, thank you, sponsored by the U.S. Forest Service. Be sure to consult your conference program for the list of this afternoon's breakout sessions. We'll be back in this room, 7 p.m. tonight, for the Appreciation Banquet. Please remember, this is a ticketed event, so you must have your ticket to get in. I also want to remind everyone to please fill out a conference evaluation. There's a link to the online evaluation in your printed program, and there's also hard copies available at the registration desk. Our speakers this morning will be available at the Q&A at the speakers booth in the expo immediately following this session. I encourage you to take a few minutes to visit with them and stop by the other booths at the expo while you're there. Finally, I ask President Garber to come up for one final announcement.
Thank you, Lee. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this session this morning. I think a lot of information was provided. But you know, as we are planning and getting into this program and getting it ready for you, we also are beginning planning for future meetings in the near future. And we are presently working with the state of Washington and their State Association of Conservation Districts for the initial plan of the NACD Summer Board Meeting, and Conservation Tour. Remember, I mentioned that the milestone in dealing with soil health, where we've got a program that we're planning on July 11th through the 13th in Spokane, Washington. So at this time, we have a few slides maybe we can run on the scene.
Just a place in time, a state of mind or a memory. It takes me back to the things I felt. We were young, on our own, and feeling free. I wanna be in the moment, to live a little life, just breathe it in. And I know that you're ready, so take my hand, we'll touch the sky. I'm ready to fly, take me on a journey. I'm ready to fly, set me free. I'm ready to fly, take me on a journey. I'm ready to fly, no boundaries. We're on this road together, and there's still so much that we haven't seen. I feel so good, anticipated what's ahead for you and me. I'm gonna live in this moment, just let it all wash over me. Now take my hand and set me free. I'm ready to fly, take me on a journey. I'm ready to fly.
So please make plans to come join us in the Great Northwest in Spokane, Washington in July so we can learn more about soil health efforts and the great pollution in those areas. So take a little time this afternoon, make the breakout sessions. Your board of directors are going to be meeting. You have the opportunity to come in and listen and observe. You're going to have a new officer slate elected at 4:50 if you want to be there for that event. The expo is going to remain open for another hour or so, and then that'll be closing out so that this evening we can come into the Acadia Room for your reception, sponsored by the Maryland Association of Conservation Districts. We'll have a little entertainment sponsored by the Louisiana Association of Conservation Districts, and the banquet to follow thereafter with a little bit of Cajun humor. So with no further business, I now declare this business session of NACD adjourned. Thank you.
We were doing it right. We were coming alive. Yeah, caught up in the sun.